There's different kinds of primates. Some that are mostly folivorous, which is they are mostly leaf eating, like non-gorillas. There are others, like certain monkeys, that are more frugivorous, meaning they mostly eat fruits. We, of course, evolved eating a whole variety of different shoots and roots and different plant foods. But do we tend more towards leaf eating or fruit eating? And it turns out it looks like fruit eating, indeed. That as healthy as greens are, fruit is kind of number one on the list. And no wonder why. The Global Burden of Disease Study, the largest study of disease risk factors in history, found that inadequate fruit consumption was among the 5 top killer risk factors when it comes to humanity's diet. Not getting enough fruits is responsible for millions of deaths. We have to eat more fruit.
Okay, welcome back to the Mystical Mountain Podcast. This is episode 11, I believe, or maybe technically 12 because I haven't released one yet. Anyways, I'm here today with Anne Osborne, fruitarian, if I'm correct, for 30 plus years. Is that right?
Yeah, 32 years.
Yeah, 32 years. And that's amazing because you don't come across too many people who have been doing it that long and very consistent. But we're going to get into that subject today, the subject of course, fruitarianism, raw veganism, if you want, some may call it that, plant-based diet, etc. And just to be clear for everybody listening out there who's been listening to the podcast, we jump around from subjects a little bit. You know, one time it might be about Sasquatch, and then it might go to diet, health and diet, Freemasonry, etc. So I'm always about getting into different subjects and topics, often of which are maybe not your normal everyday conversation. So I realize, of course, we know that diet can be a very sensitive subject for some people, just like politics, just like religion, things of that nature. People get really wound up when they get talking about diet. Sometimes, you know, they get pretty heated. So, you know what? That's a warning, I guess. If you're out there and you like your meat and everything, that's all good. Take in the information if you'd like. You might find it interesting. You might not. You might not like it. You might like it. We'll see. But nonetheless, we don't shy away from any of those conversations and stuff on here. So anyways, Anne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what got you started into this whole thing?
Thank you. Well, I think it really goes back to when I was 20 and I was at university in the UK, in Canterbury, in Kent. And I thought I was pretty healthy. I was 20 years old, didn't have any major health issues, always felt pretty good. But me and a friend, we decided to become vegan, and it was purely for ethical reasons. I was no longer comfortable with some of the practices going on in the dairy and egg industry. And so it was kind of like an overnight thing. We'd been putting it off a bit because I like my chocolate, I like my cheese, but I knew inside ethically for me that it was the right thing to do to become vegan. And I wasn't expecting any health benefits at all. It was done purely for ethics. Because at the time, as I'd said, I was 20, thought I was in reasonable health. And what struck me was the very next day, I noticed a huge health improvement. So the very next day after I gave up all animal products, I was already vegetarian, but I was still eating dairy and eggs. I was walking up the hill to the university campus. So my student digs were at the bottom of the hill and the university campus was at the top of the hill. So every day I'd have to walk up the hill to get to uni. And every day, before I got to the top of the hill, I would start wheezing. I would have a tightness in my chest. And that day, after I'd given up animal products, I was at the top of the hill and I thought, wow, I'm not wheezy. I haven't got a tightness in my chest. And it just hit me. It was really like a revelation, because I hadn't even thought about any health benefits of veganism. That was out of the picture for me. But here I was the very next day after giving up animal products, and I'd got this health improvement. And I've never had that wheeziness or tightness in my chest since that the day before I gave up animal products. And it was just really, really interesting. And I've never really thought much about health before. I think often if we have pretty good health, we take our health for granted until something happens. But what happened to me hadn't been sort of a decrease in my health, so I needed to sort of reassess what I was doing, but it was an increase in my health that was very unexpected. So from that moment on, I became very interested in how what we put into our bodies affects our health and our well-being. And I looked and tried various types of vegan diet. I tried a macrobiotic vegan diet. I tried an Anne Wigmore, lots of sprouts and wheatgrass vegan diet. I tried a whole food vegan diet, no refined products. And I felt pretty good on all of them, but not that good that I stuck with any one of them for more than about 12 or 18 months. And then when I was 24, I was back in my hometown of Leicester, also in the UK. And I was part of a local animal rights group, and we had regular speakers. And this month, one of our speakers was a guy called David Shelley. And David was a fruitarian. And he looked great. He had a lot of energy. He cycled everywhere. He was very fit, healthy. Mentally, he seemed very, very sharp. And whatever he was doing was working well for him. And there was a group of us at the time, we were all ethical vegans, and we were all intrigued by this guy, David Shelley, and his fruitarian diet. And so we all thought, we're going to try this, we're going to start this. And we formed an organic buying group. We were sourcing really good organic fruit from all over the world, because living in the UK, it's not like now I'm in Australia, I can get good local produce all year round. In the UK, yes, you can in the summer and the autumn or the fall, but the other seasons, it's a bit hard to get good local organic produce. And so that was a really great start. I feel that we got this good organic produce, which was delicious. And it was always mono meals to start with, because the fruit was so good. To mix it or change it in any way was almost a disservice to the fruit. And that's really how I got started on the diet. And it ticks the boxes for me, like ethically, environmentally, health-wise, because I think no matter how much a diet ticks the boxes, environmentally and ethically, if it doesn't work for you on a basic day-to-day health level, then it's not really, very effective. And, I've stuck with it. It's stuck with me, and I've never really looked back, because I felt very good on the diet. It's brought me a lot of joy. There's so many things about the diet, this symbiotic relationship between fruit plants and fruit trees and humans. And so that's how I got started. And I've been on the diet now for 32 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that is something else. And it's interesting how you had such an immediate impact, apparently, from, like you said, the next day or something. You weren't wheezing as much going up the hill.
It was the next day. There was no wheezing. And I'd given up animal, sort of like meat, becoming vegetarian. I hadn't noticed any health differences in particular. I never really liked meat very much. I didn't eat much of it, but I did like my cheese. I did like my chocolate. I did like dairy stuff. And so giving them up, I think really did, for me personally, it had a big impact on my health, and I felt a lot better.
Yeah. And how long were you in the UK for doing this fruit dominant diet, and how easy was that? Because we know that's a little high up there in the northern hemisphere, and we don't always get the greatest content of fruit.
Yes, I was the first 12 years I was in the UK doing this diet, and there were some challenges. One thing that really helped was there's a whole group of us doing it. So there's about 6 of us all going from a vegan diet to a fruitarian diet. And I think that really helped, because it's the social contact and the social support was there. And I think a lot of people doing unusual diets or diets that many other people aren't doing can find it challenging, because they just don't have that social support system. So that was one thing I think that helped. Second thing that helped, which I've already mentioned, was forming the organic fruit buying group. And the fruit really was excellent quality. And getting it wholesale through a buying group meant that we got the price at a reasonable cost, so we could afford it. And instead of just being able to, if I was on my own buying 1 or 2 boxes a week, we could get 6 or 7 boxes of fruit a week. So we had more of a variety. Challenges with it being cold. I think fruit, or not all fruit, but a lot of fruit, such as I find, oranges, I find melons, have a very cooling effect on the body. So if you're in a cool climate, And I lived in a house that didn't have very good heating. There was no heating upstairs. And we used to get ice on the inside of the windows in the winter. And so that was a sort of like a cold home environment as well as outside. And for me, exercise was what really helped. Exercise, building up your inside temperature through exercise and getting your circulation and your lymph going. So I found that very useful. If I felt cold, I would do some skipping, go for a run, do some exercise. And that for me was a bit of a game changer. Upping my exercise was probably the biggest thing that helped me in the cold. Another thing that helped was, because a group of us had started out on this diet, we used to go away in the winter months for maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. We'd go to southern Portugal or the Canary Islands or somewhere warm, so that just for, a couple of months out of the colder months, we'd have better fruit and sunshine. And looking back on it, I think it was, as much as getting better fruit was important, it was also the vitamin D, getting that sunshine. Because I think when you go on a raw vegan diet and you're not eating processed foods, the only way you're going to get your vitamin D is from the sun, unless you supplement. And I think, there is a place for supplement if you don't get, exposure to enough sunshine. If you're on a processed vegan diet and you're having margarine, you're having soy milks, you're having cereals, often they are fortified with vitamin D. But I really found myself wanting to be outside more, wanting to be in the sun more once I became a fruitarian. When I was a regular vegan, I didn't have that. I mean, I liked it if it was sunny, I liked going out. But when I was on a fruit diet, I felt much more of a pull to be outside, and a much more appreciation for the sun. And I noticed how the sun can give us direction, so we can tell what direction we're in from the position of the sun, and the way the sun moves around throughout the year and how it sets in different places throughout the year. And before, I'd never even really appreciated the sun. So I think that was a thing that I noticed, appreciating the sun and going away to get that sunshine in the cooler months, exercising to keep warm, always sourcing good quality fruit through the buying group. And in addition, where I lived, Leicester, there was a very good open market that was on every day of the week. So you could go in and get pretty good quality fruit and vegetables. Also, there was a lot of different ethnic groups living in the city. So there was the ethnic shops as well to source a lot of really good quality fruit from. So for me, the most important things, I think, are raising your body temperature, keeping warm through exercise, possibly going away somewhere warmer to access the sunshine for vitamin D. And if not, I would suggest supplementing vitamin D or getting a vitamin D lamp, and sourcing really good quality produce. And if you're living somewhere that doesn't grow stuff in the winter or the colder months, to source that from a buying group or a wholesaler.
Yeah, that's interesting. I might have to look into that more myself. So buying it from a wholesaler or some type of group. I'm kind of curious how somebody would maybe look into that. I haven't heard too many people mention this idea that live in the colder climates that are trying to do this, because it's it's harder to get good quality fruit,
and it's the cost as well. When you're buying boxes of things, then the price will go down. And if you get a few people together who are interested, we hadn't heard of it before, but we just thought we'll get a few people together and then we'll look into people that sell organic fruit by the box load locally, and we found a very good supplier, and that's how we started that up, and it worked very, very well. And we'd alternate it. So one week the fruit would get delivered to somebody's house, the next week it would get delivered to somebody else's house. So you didn't always have to travel to somebody else's house to get your fruit. One week you'd get it to your place, you'd divide it up, and then people would come and pick it up, or sometimes you would deliver it to them, if they couldn't pick it up.
Were you when you say how you were ordering this fruit, were you getting tropical fruit coming from far away, or more so local fruit?
We were getting all sorts of fruit. So we were getting some of the Mediterranean fruit. I remember these beautiful apricots. We got a big wooden crate of apricots, which came from Italy. And I don't think I've ever had a better apricot since. They were just perfectly ripe, because it's so hard to get good apricots. They're either woolly or they're underripe, but these were wonderful. And then we'd get sweet grenadilla from Burkina Faso, and we'd get Egyptian mango. So it was all over, really beautiful fruit. So we were very fortunate. I think that really helped me, because it gave me a good foundation, and it made me realize how important the fruit quality is. Because if you're getting poor quality fruit that's been sprayed a lot, that's been grown in poor soils, that's been picked unripe, it's not going to have the micronutrients in it that you need. And the micronutrients are the vitamins, the minerals, and the antioxidants. And organic, more and more I'm finding out how important organic is. And when you go into the relationship, this wonderful symbiotic relationship between fruit trees and mycelium or fungi in the soil, you realize how important it is to get organically grown fruit. And the reason for that is when you start putting chemicals in the soil, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, they will all kill the fungus in the soil. And if the fungus isn't there, there'll be less minerals in the trees and in the fruit. And the way it works is this symbiotic relationship. So if you go back to your basic biology lessons, plants that have leaves can photosynthesize. So green leaves will create carbohydrate. They'll take in carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunshine to create carbohydrate or food. Now, fungi can't do that because they don't have leaves, so they can't create that carbohydrate in the same way. So the fruit trees will pass carbohydrates or food onto the fungi, and in return, the fungi can break down chemical bonds in some compounds. So calcium phosphate, for example. Now, the tree cannot absorb the calcium in the calcium phosphate because there's bonds there in between the calcium and the phosphate. But when the fungi get to work, they break down these bonds and they make the calcium in a form that the tree can then assimilate. So this is one reason why it's so important to get organic fruit or non-sprayed fruit or fruit from trees that haven't been chemically treated. So the fungi is still in the soil, and when the fungi is in the soil, the bonds in those calcium compounds will be broken down, and the tree can then assimilate the calcium, and that will go into the fruit. So that's a really important point for me, this, wonderful symbiotic relationship. And that's why, it's so important to get organic or spray-free produce if you possibly can.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that before, that about the connection, the synergy between the plant, the tree, and the fungi in the ground, doing that particular mechanism. That's pretty cool. And because I was thinking before regarding organic fruit versus non-organic fruit, I often thought to myself, well, the organic fruit here at this market down the street is like just stupid price, especially now. But I was always thinking, well, I'll just get the regular fruit because it's surely still better than other foods anyways, which I often do. But I didn't realize that aspect of it. So that's kind of an enlightening fact. I was going to say, of course, I know that people listening out here are probably asking a lot of questions. Maybe they're even yelling at the podcast right now, like, what is she talking about? How can she do this for 30 years? We know the typical questions. So maybe, even though I'm sure we've both covered them till we're blue in the face many times, there's the questions people are going to rant about: protein, B12, iron. They say you're not getting enough omegas, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on. Maybe tell us how you've been doing performance-wise, health-wise, maybe if you've even had any blood tests because you're curious yourself about the different levels of things in your body. What do you think? What do you have to say about the protein thing, the B12, the this and that being deficient? What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think any diet you're on, you have to make sure you get sufficient macronutrients, which is proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and sufficient micronutrients, which is your vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And if you don't get them or get sufficient for your needs, whatever diet you're on, you will fail and you will have health challenges. With protein, I think there's been an overemphasis in many ways on how much protein we do need. And the symptoms, if you're protein deficient, your wounds won't heal very quickly. You'll have issues with your hair or your skin, your nails. And if your hair's growing well, if your skin's good, if your nails are strong, then I think, it's indicative that you are getting enough protein. Also, a fact that most people don't realize is that protein is recycled in the body. People just think in terms of how much protein is going in every day. But the protein that we do take in isn't just excreted. A lot of it is recycled and used again. So I think that's an important point to look at. So I think it is important. Nobody wants to be protein deficient. It is important to look at how you're doing and how your energy levels are. I mean, my energy levels are very good. They've been consistently good. I run 10K every other day. I spend most of my day gardening, pulling big 22-kilo hoses about. And it's quite a physical job, gardening, compared to working on a computer, which I used to do before. And I feel nicely tired at the end of the day and I sleep well, but I don't feel like, a lack of energy. I don't feel a crash in the middle of the day. I have good, consistent energy levels. So I think with protein, unless a person has issues assimilating protein, or if they're getting symptoms, their hair's not growing very much, or their skin isn't what it should be, or their wounds are healing slowly, then maybe they do need more protein. And one thing I noticed for sure when I started on this diet was how much more quickly any wound healed. It would clot very quickly. There was very little bleeding, and I would heal much more quickly than when I was on a standard diet. Another thing is bruising. Before I went on a raw vegan diet, I would bruise very, very easily. When I was a child, I had bruises up my legs all the time. And even as an adult, I just had to bang myself very lightly and I would bruise. Since being on a fruit diet, I really have to give myself a good whack on something to bruise. The capillaries, I think, have really improved in their strength. So I don't bruise. And if I was starting to bruise again, I'd be thinking, hey, is there something lacking in my diet? What's happening with my venous system? What's happening with the strength of my capillaries that I'm bruising easily? So there's all these things to look out for. Blood tests can be important. I've always had regular values in the blood tests I've had, but I don't think blood tests are the be all and end all. I think you've got to also look at any symptoms you're having, any deficiency symptoms. So moving on to B12, there's very obvious B12 deficiency symptoms. And I do think B12 is very important. If you lack B12, you can get neural issues, you can get permanent nerve damage. So it's definitely something you don't want to be deficient in. In my blood tests, I'm in the normal range, but on the low side of normal with B12, but I've never had any deficiency symptoms. And I think we have to look at people as individuals. I've known people do this diet and after 18 months, they've had severe B12 deficiency symptoms. They've had tingling in their extremities, in their fingers, in their toes. They've had a numb tongue. As soon as they supplemented, those symptoms went away. And to me, that's, indicative that they were deficient in B12. But I've known other people do this diet for 20 or more years and have never supplemented and have never had any B12 deficiency symptoms. So I think it's important to get your levels checked to see if you are deficient. And you can always supplement if you feel that you don't want to even go down, have any risk of being B12 deficient. There was a lady that wrote a book in the 1970s called Sheila Andrews called The No Cooking Fruitarian Cookbook. And she wrote how her and her daughter, they'd been fruitarian for several years, how their levels were always low side of normal, similar to mine, but they never had any deficiency symptoms. So they decided to supplement. Their levels went up on their blood test, but they didn't feel any different. And so in the end, they stopped supplementing. And she came to the conclusion that maybe people on a fruit diet have lower levels, but don't necessarily have any deficiency. And that's really what I found. The only times I've supplemented have been during pregnancy and breastfeeding, where I thought I'm responsible for somebody else. It's very important to supplement. So I did supplement during those times. And then recently I did an experiment. I thought I'll just take B12, sublingual B12 for a couple of months and see if I notice any difference. I noticed no difference at all in how I felt, in my energy levels. So I tend to think that I have a sufficiency of B12 for myself. But I do think it's important that everybody's individuals and to get your levels checked. And if you experience any symptoms at all of B12 deficiency, I would recommend taking a good quality supplement so that you reverse that deficiency and you don't get any nerve damage.
Yeah.
With the iron, I used to give blood when I lived in the UK. When I moved to Australia, because of mad cow disease, they wouldn't accept anybody who lived in the UK during the period I did to be a blood donor, and they've just recently changed that. So I haven't given blood yet in Australia. When I donated blood in the UK, they always test you first to see if you're anemic. If you're anemic, they won't take your blood. And I was never anemic. In blood tests I've had since, I've never been anemic. So for me personally, I've always had sufficient iron on this diet.
Yeah.
With the omegas, it's more, I think, about the balance between omega-6 and omega-3. But I do tend to think if you're eating good quality, organic, whole produce, there isn't so much of an issue. I think when it comes down to it, it's the refined products, the products that have added refined vegetable oils that can be really, really high in omega-6. I think that's when you can get into issues. And one fruit in particular, if you want to get your levels well balanced, is papaya. Papaya is the fruit I found out of all the fruits that I've seen the results of that has really good omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. It has much more omega-3 than omega-6. So that is one fruit that I would recommend to help with getting more omega-3. And it's also that ratio, making sure you've got more omega-3 than omega-6. So yeah, I think that everybody has to be careful and everybody has to ensure, especially with so much processed food available today, so much denaturing of the soils and degradation of the soils. I think we all have to be very careful that we're getting sufficient, especially micronutrients, especially the minerals that have been leached, have been taken out of the soils. And I think the best way to do that, whatever your diet, is to eat the best quality food that you can source and make it a priority, because it's an investment in your health. For me, it's like I've never worried about spending money on good quality fruit. And I think it's having this abundance attitude as well. I think if you tell yourself, I can't afford organic fruit, I can't access organic fruit, you're programming yourself for that to be the reality. And I can say this because I've been a single mother on a very, very low income, and I have managed to source and really good quality organic fruit and feed my child and myself with that fruit. So I know it can be done on a low income. And I think part of it is having that mentality that you are going to get great quality organic fruit in your life and you are going to be able to source it, coupled with doing the work, looking at what wholesalers are in your area, going to the local ethnic markets, going to the local markets, going to the local shops. So having the positive mentality, but also putting the work in. It's like the saying, trust in God, but tie your camel. You have faith, but you also got to do the work as well. Yeah.
Good answer. So many thoughts on those things you said there. Like, I think it's worth mentioning that, a lot of people are going to experience a lot of different things if they try to slowly progress to a vegan diet, or to a raw vegan diet, or to a fruitarian diet, or a primarily raw diet, or whatever the case is. Different issues may arise, and oftentimes those can be the result of, I guess you could call it the sins of the past, what you've done to your body in your life previously. Sometimes maybe even genetics could play a factor in certain issues. And I think often when people try to go this way a little bit, they might run into a couple of problems, especially in the beginning. And then they immediately, they have other people in their ear saying, oh, it's because that diet's bad for you, or it's not meant for you. You need to eat this, or you're low in this, you're deficient in that. And oftentimes it could simply be a detoxification, a healing crisis, or something else. But like you said, yeah, definitely logical to check your levels on things and make sure that you have your B12. And like, I was never concerned about it really for years. And, I just not recently, but a year ago, started taking like a spray. I don't think it's the cyano one. I think it's the methylcobalamin B12. And I'm not concerned about it. I know I got it in there in case. But I think another thing maybe worth mentioning is that more is not necessarily always better. And I wonder myself oftentimes if their supposed daily values, the percentages they tell people they should have of any given protein, mineral, vitamin, is sometimes maybe a little overestimated. We seem to be such a culture of overconsumption, and I think that can really be stated often for protein. I have found in my own experience and from other people I know that, and again, you have to make sure you have enough protein, what you need. But I think they really try to sell us on the idea that we need way more protein than we actually do with the animal foods, the meat, or even protein powders directed towards athletes and bodybuilders and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of it's greatly over-exaggerated. And I think that someone like yourself, who's been eating this way, eating so clean for so long, your body probably is working very efficiently. And what you take in, the nutrients you take in, probably go a long way. They probably go further than your average person. If they went out on any given day and ate what you ate, they may end up being really hungry really quickly because they're not used to that, and their body may not be as efficient at extracting everything and utilizing it. So I'm wondering maybe what you think about the whole process of when your body is much more clean and digestion, utilization, absorption. Like what would you say about that stuff?
I think that's a really good point, and I think assimilation is vital and is often overlooked. When I started out on the diet, I needed to eat probably twice as much as I do now to maintain. I had good energy, but to maintain my weight, I needed to eat twice as much. And then I did a long extended mono orange juice diet of 52 days that worked really well for me personally. And I started it to accompany a friend. So I had no expectations at all going into the diet. I didn't think, it's going to do this for me or it's going to do that for me. I just thought, this sounds interesting. I'll give it a go. And what happened when I stopped the diet and started to eat a mixed fruit diet again was that I found I needed to eat a lot less to maintain my weight. And also I just had the feeling that the fruit was doing me so much more good. And now looking back on it, I think what happened was during that orange juice mono diet, my digestive system had a tune-up and it healed, and it just became much more efficient at assimilating the nutrients. And I think when we say everybody needs X amount of calories or everybody needs this amount, it's blanket assumptions that are very suffocating because it doesn't work for everybody. And I might give an example, say person A. So person A has had a lot of sickness as a child. They were bottle fed as a baby. They were a cesarean baby. They had a lot of allopathic medicine, a lot of infections, a lot of antibiotics. And then growing up, they had a processed food diet. When they got older, they took quite a lot of recreational drugs. Again, they were eating a very processed diet. And person A may eat 5,000 calories a day, but they may only assimilate like 25% of what they're eating because the villi, or the little finger-like projections in their digestive tract, have been damaged and compromised. And what those villi do is greatly increase the surface area of the digestive tract. So if your villi are damaged, which they can be through recreational drugs, through processed foods, through allopathic medicine, you're not going to assimilate as much because the surface area is compromised. So we've got person B. Person B was a natural birth. They were breastfed for an extended period. They had very little allopathic medicine as a child. They had whole foods and organic foods. Growing up, they didn't have very much recreational drugs, and they continued to eat like a whole food, organic diet. And that person maybe eats 2,000 calories a day, but is assimilating like 85% of what they're eating. So we find that person B, even though they're eating far less calories than person A, is actually assimilating more because their digestive system is in much better health. So I always think calories going in is a fallacy in a way. It's only half the equation. It's bad science. It's not looking at what's happening inside your body. It's not looking at how much you are assimilating. And how much you assimilate really depends on the state of your gut and your gut health. And gut health can be improved. It really can. And we're finding out more and more how important our gut biome is for our health. And when our gut biome increases in health, our overall health improves, we assimilate a lot more. So I think it's very, very important to look at assimilation. And it's not how much you eat, it's how much you assimilate. And if you're assimilating more macronutrients, so if you're assimilating more calories in the terms of protein, carbohydrates, and fats, you can bet that you're also assimilating more micronutrients, so your vitamins and minerals. So it's so important. And I think this is overlooked. We're always told how many calories to eat. And yes, they'll look at your gender and your activity level and your age to work out how many calories you should be eating. But nobody says, what's the state of your digestive health? What's the state of your gut microbiome in order to work out how much you need? Because that really does affect how much you need. And a lot of people I know that have been doing this diet or a similar diet long term find that they need to eat less as they sort of travel along, as they get healed, as their digestive system starts to operate more efficiently. They need to eat less. And I think we always need to eat enough, and we shouldn't shame people because they eat 5,000 calories, nor should we shame people because they only need 1,500 calories. If what somebody's eating works well for them and it keeps their weight stable, if they want their weight to be stable, and they're getting their sufficient micronutrients so that they've got good health, then it really, we can't say everybody should eat this amount of calories. It really, really depends on how much you're assimilating.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely worthy to be mentioned that I think in my own experience from when I eat more and more of a high fruit diet, or even just more whole foods, plant-based diet that I transitioned to like a decade ago, that I felt like I became maybe a bit more in tune with, or my body became in tune with what I needed at any given moment. Like I'd get cravings for oranges for a while, maybe even a couple of weeks, and then it would just kind of dissipate. And I never really had sensations like that before. And then I'd move on to like mangoes or something, the next month, and have a ton of those. And another thing I was going to mention to you is that, like, I have noticed in, I guess you'd call it the raw vegan community online, and from talking to people and stuff, some of them seem to eat like they look fit, of course, and they seem to be able to eat like these exorbitant amounts of food. Like I see Freely, the banana girl, really fit and stuff and active and everything. And, there's videos of her hitting up like 30 banana smoothies or something like that over the course of like, I don't know, an hour or something. And, gets a bit bloated and then it goes away or whatever. I'm a lot bigger than her, and I could never even get close to that. Like I felt like, I put in a couple bananas and some fruit and whatever hemp hearts or something in a smoothie, and I'm good. And I feel pretty good for a while. Like I can go work out and stuff and I'm good. How do you think some people are able to eat so much fruit in one sitting? Like, why is that?
I think, again, it's important to look at individual needs when looking at how much somebody needs. And I think Freely has said in the past that she's taken a lot of recreational drugs. She had allopathic drugs. She had big issues with her gut before she discovered a vegan plant-based diet. So if you're looking at that, it could be, I mean, I'm not her physician, I don't know, but it could be that she did have some compromise to her digestive system, a combination of things, of the medications that she took in the past could have damaged her villi, and she could need to eat more. And I think that's why it's important not to say everybody needs a certain amount, because it's our past health histories, and it may be like the sins of the father, as you mentioned before. It may be what our parents have done, what our grandparents have done, what genetic things have carried over. And it's why some people don't need to take vitamin B12. They seem to create it themselves and assimilate it themselves, and other people don't. Some people have pernicious anemia in their families, which means that they can't assimilate B12, even if they're having a lot of food that contains B12. My grandmother on my father's side and my father both had pernicious anemia when they got older, and they were both omnivores. And so for me, it's something that I will keep an eye on, because at the moment I seem to be fine. My B12 levels are normal, low side of normal, but they're still in normal range without supplementing. But it might be as I get older, that genetic thing will kick in. It might not. I don't know. So we always have to look at genetic differences between people. Also, how much energy we expend, what happened in our past, and everybody has their own, I believe, unique prescription for how many calories you need. And if that works for you, that's great. But because it works for someone else, it doesn't mean it'll work for you. What works for you, that's also great. One isn't better than the other. It's just what's right for you. And I think that's so important, because I know some people go onto a fruit diet and they put on a lot of weight. Other people go onto a fruit diet and they lose weight, even though both people might be eating similar amounts of fruit. So it just shows how our anatomies differ. Although I believe we're all biologically fruit eaters, we differ because in the past, our parents, our grandparents have eaten differently. They've had different health histories, and genetics is there. I mean, we are limited to some extent by our genetics, but I do believe we can't control that. What we can do is move forward. We control our health moving forward, but it's something to bear in mind. And I think it's really important to think, well, if I don't want to lose weight, and if my weight's stable, and if I don't want to gain weight, my weight's stable, and this amount I'm eating keeps my weight stable, then it's very likely that you're eating the right amount for yourself. But it might not be the right amount for anybody else. It's a very individual thing.
Yeah. And I hate it when I sometimes see a story, like I saw recently a couple months ago, some young woman died, and she was on a raw vegan diet, I think it was. And she obviously had some sort of eating disorder. Like, you could tell she was extremely thin, like anorexic, bulimic, something like that. It was very obvious. And sometimes it aggravates me when I see, like, most people that are anemic, bulimic, and they die from it are not vegans. Like, they eat animal products, et cetera, et cetera. But as soon as it happens to one vegan, let alone a raw vegan, oh my goodness, the media will jump on it and just be like, she is eating just fruit and not other stuff. So I'm mentioning this because it goes back to what you're saying about kind of being in tune with your body, making sure that you're getting what you need, and being in tune helps with that, of course. And being on top of certain important things like B12 and everything's important that we need, but just kind of being on top of that, because people are different, but it kind of leads me into my next point I was going to ask you about. People are different. People have different genetics. Sometimes it predisposes them to certain things. They may need to eat a little bit more of one vitamin or mineral than another compared to somebody else. But I think I'm of the opinion that, like every other animal on the planet, we too have a species-specific diet. But I think the species-specific diet is, of course, an extremely hot debate depending on who you ask. And for me, when I look at the actual physiology of the human body and all the different parts we have and compare it to all the other types of animals, we seem like we are the most similar to the most frugivorous animal out there.
Mhm.
I think it's maybe the bonobo, but
Mhm.
of frugivorous animals in general. And we maybe look even more frugivorous because we, like, even they have a couple teeth that are a bit more pointy than us, or something
Yeah.
like that.
Mm.
And I realize, though, there's the conundrum that, yeah, people are able to eat meat and bread and cheese and God
Mm.
knows almost any other horrible processed creation out there, and still live. Some people still live a long life. Doesn't
Yes.
mean it's
Yeah.
a good quality life, but they live a long life nonetheless.
Mm.
But I do believe that we are inherently frugivores, like you believe.
Mm.
Um, I don't agree that we're carnivores, obviously, but we
Mm.
can eat meat. But I mean, some people say we're omnivores because we can eat everything. We can eat fruit,
Mm.
we can eat meat, salads, whatever. And then you
Yeah.
have vegetarians and vegans who will somehow refer to us as herbivores, which I think makes even less sense than
Yeah.
omnivores,
Yes.
because I couldn't imagine eating grass and leaves. Um,
Yeah.
so, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I do very much believe that we are by design frugivores. So everything I've looked at in the past 30 years, and I'm still like researching and learning, and I really like researching and looking at old books on natural hygiene, on diets, on the fruit diet. And probably one of the important books for me, and it was published, it was published a long time ago, I believe at the end of the 19th century, and it was called Fruit and Bread by Gustav Schlickisen, and it was translated into English, I think in 1888, something like that. So it was a long while ago. And he put up these comparative analysis tables, and you may have seen them. I think that was the original comparative analysis tables, and people have taken that. So he compared the herbivores, he compared the omnivores, he compared the frugivores, and it's very, very interesting. And one thing he looks at all the, the length of the digestive tract, the acidity of the body, various things. But one thing that I think is interesting is he looks at the dental formula. Now, the dental formula is the amount of molars, the amount of canines, and the amount of incisors each animal has. So people say all the time, oh, well, we've got these little pointy teeth, we must be omnivores or we must be carnivores. But it's the dental formula. So the dental formula of a frugivore is, guess what? Exactly the same as that of a human. And that's in terms of the number and positions of the incisors, the canines, and the molars in the mouth. We have a very different dental formula to the omnivorous animals and to the herbivorous animals. The herbivores have like a horny pad on the top of their mouth so they can grind the grass down. And, the carnivores, we have the dental formula, because teeth is something that people often meant. We have the dental formula of the anthropoid apes who are frugivorous, often when they can access enough fruit. And that's another thing. People will bring in chimps and say, well, chimps, they kill other animals and they eat a lot of other things. But there was a book written in the 1970s, and it was called, I think, The Vegetable Passion. But it mentioned in it about these researchers that were looking at chimpanzees. Now, in an area where the chimps could access good quality fruit all year round, 90% of their diet was fruit. In another more remote and high altitude area, the chimps only had maybe 30% fruit. So I think it's important to look at, with these anthropoid apes, its availability of food. So they're a bit like humans. They can eat and live and survive on other foods, but if they can access good quality fruits, a higher percentage of the diet will be made up of fruit. So I think that's something important to look at.
Yeah, that's pretty telling, I think.
Yeah. So I do believe we're frugivores by design. I believed at some point people moved away from the areas where there was sufficient food, and so humans needed to eat other things to survive, and they would eat, animals and animal products and anything they could eat so that they could survive, because survival was more important to them than, saying, oh, I'm only going to eat this. I don't think there was, that issue in those days.
Yeah.
And so I think humans are adaptable, and it's like rats. Rats can eat like a variety of foods, and they can survive. Other animals, like some captive animals in zoos, and I don't particularly like a lot of zoos, but they have to be fed a very specific diet. And if they're not, they will die very, very quickly. But it seems humans are quite adaptive, and we have had to be adaptive when we moved out of the more tropical and subtropical regions, because there wasn't the food available that we were eating when we lived in those areas. And I think something else you mentioned about some people living to a good age and eating all sorts of stuff. And I think, but if you look at the people that were living to a long age, there was that lady in France, and I think she lived to 121 or 122, and she still smoked and she ate chocolate, but she didn't eat a lot. She didn't overeat. And I think you'll find most of the people that live to a good age are not overweight people. They tend to be more lean people, and they eat maybe, whatever they want, an omnivorous diet, but they don't overeat. And I think in addition, diet isn't the only thing. I think diet's the backbone. It holds things together. But if you have a positive attitude, if you have a loving heart, if you're a nice, kind person, then I think that adds a lot to your life. If you're sort of a sad person, an angry person, a frustrated person, whatever diet you're on, I don't think you'll have a good quality of life. So diet's important. So sunshine, or getting vitamin D from a supplement, making sure you've got vitamin B12, positive thoughts, fresh air, good supply of water, appropriate level of exercise, and appropriate level of rest. It's not just about diet, although that is an important factor, I think, for the feeling healthy. And I think another thing is, for me, I don't care how long I live. But what I do care about is each day that I am alive, I feel good. I can bounce out of bed. I feel healthy. I'm not a burden on anyone else because I've got poor health. That is really important for me. I'm not looking to live to any certain age. I'm just looking that while I'm alive to keep myself healthy and so that I enjoy life. Because for me, if I lived a long life and I was ill and sick and relying on other people to care for me, that wouldn't be a good quality of life.
Yeah. And I think you kind of touched on all the elements, like quite literally what I've thought of before, like earth, wind, water, fire. So sunlight would be like fire. Earth would be the food, which is the main topic we're talking about. But of course, there's much more than that when it comes to health. Good quality water, oxygen, air, good quality air, but not only good quality air, but proper breathing habits, deeper breathing, not just breathing up in the chest. All these things are extremely important. And what you mentioned about, by the way, do I sound like a Canadian when I say the word about?
I don't know. I'm not that good. I'm only getting to the point where I differentiate between American and Canadian accents. I'm sorry.
I had to ask you, because sometimes I get told that it's a tell, like, oh, you could be from America, but as soon as you say the word about, they claim that I say a boot, but I don't really see it. But anyways, okay. But I was going to say, you made that point about having a good attitude, having a loving personality and whatnot. I notice that when I conversate and speak with people who tend to be mostly raw foods, like raw vegan, or mostly fruitarian, or completely fruitarian, or when I see them interact with other people, or even on like Facebook and stuff, I feel like I've definitely noticed, from being at fruit festivals and stuff, that even when somebody who is primarily eating raw foods disagrees with you on something, even if it's usually a touchy subject for the general public, I notice that fruitarians and raw vegans, or you don't have to be that, but just somebody that eats a high percentage of their diet from those things, they seem to be very well grounded. They seem to not be as apt to anger easily, or get personal, or throw insults and stuff when they don't agree with you. Whereas, not that everybody's like this, but if I compare it on average to a vegetarian or a regular cooked food vegan, or the many different types of vegans that are out there, or people who eat, meat on average, like, I just noticed that in that community of people who eat raw foods, that people are just more calm and nicer, even if they disagree with you, which I think is a very interesting observation. And I'm wondering if you've noticed the same thing as me.
Yeah, I think I have, and especially with people that are happy in themselves. If you're happy with what you're doing and if you're happy in your life, you have, yes, if people come to you and ask for advice, that's great. If people, have questions, but you don't feel you need to prove anything to anybody, I think. And I think if you're happy with what you're doing and it's working for you and you have that self-confidence within you, then people can attack you and you don't really mind because you're happy in yourself. You know that you feel well, you know that you have a nice life, you know that you've got beautiful things in your life. And so what other people say doesn't really affect you. I think if you're feeling a lack of self-confidence, if you're feeling defensive about anything and someone attacks you, it's very different. Then you will go on the offensive and you will attack back. But it's almost like it bounces off a bit. I think when you're happy with what you're doing, and I think it's also important to respect what other people are doing. I think I've learned that as I've got older and matured, that not everybody will do what you're doing, and that's fine. And respect what other people are doing. If they're on different diets, if they have different political views, if they have different lifestyles, is to respect what they're doing, and then they're more likely to respect what you're doing as well. So I think, and I think for me as well, the fruit diet has connected me to the universe more. And that might sound a bit out there, but I just feel more connected to the trees, to the animals, to the world, so much more appreciation for nature. And it's just sometimes overwhelming. You see a particularly beautiful tree or you'll see a beautiful animal and you just feel so enriched. And I think when you feel happy and enriched and satisfied, then you're not looking to get into arguments with people. And if people criticize you, it's like, so what? They can. And somebody once said, what other people think of you is none of your business. And I think that's quite a good thing, because it isn't really any of your business. If you're happy within yourself and you feel that you're doing the right thing by yourself and by other people, and you're communicating with other people in an appropriate way, and you're treating other people well, then, you feel happy inside, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says about you, because there's people that aren't going to like what you're doing. There's people that are going to be critical of you, and that's fine. They're entitled to their opinion. And I think if we get offensive at that, then that's more about us than about them, really, because we can choose how we react to anything in life. And I do think the diet helps you become more grounded and connected to the planet as well. But I think when you get happy with what you're doing, then you don't need to be defensive if anybody attacks that, because they've got their own opinion. They can attack you if they want, and you don't have to respond in kind.
Well, we definitely all have our own opinions, and sometimes they could be passionate opinions on things. But yeah, I do like to think, like, when I interact with people that I don't agree with, that I won't hopefully let myself stoop to the level of insults or getting too angry and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be people that don't agree with you. So it should never come as a shock when somebody doesn't agree with you. And this podcast is not an attack on anybody who isn't on a plant-based diet or fruitarian diet or anything like that. It's merely because I find the subject interesting, and I've experienced it, over the last 10 years, as you have for much longer. So I think it's good information to get out there, at least, and let people contemplate. I do think, though, that to further elaborate that, I think there's something, this is just a theory of mine. I think there's something about fruit specifically that raises your consciousness, so to speak, not only in a matter where maybe you're calmer or you interact more nicely with people, but I also notice that within the community of people who kind of tend more to eat this way, that they also seem to be often trying to find the truth on other unrelated subjects to diet. Or they tend more to often be into things like meditation, spirituality stuff, for lack of a better term, and or maybe finding out the truth about our reality, or whatever the government's hiding, or things of that nature. It's almost like, I feel like the food gravitates the human mind towards thinking about these things and wanting to know the truth, which I find also very interesting. I've noticed that in this community and with myself also. And I don't think it's necessarily a case where people that are already into that stuff just get attracted to raw veganism or fruitarianism. I think it's a little bit more possibly the other way around. And I think it's an effect of the food. And if you believe that all food has certain levels of energy, like you can see in Kirlian photography, I think it's called, then you'll see that fruit has the highest amount of angstroms or whatever, of basically an aura around it when you use this certain type of photography. And, if the food grows from the light that comes from the sun in the sky and from the air that's all around us, and you believe that light is information and consciousness and everything is connected to it all, and maybe you believe that it comes from God, or maybe you don't, that's fine. But nonetheless, I think there's something there. I think there's some sort of connection.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree with you. I think you're more connected with the universe, and you're maybe open to things as well. Maybe it opens your mind or your consciousness to other things. And so those things are then attracted into your life because you're doing something that's a bit different from everybody else. And then you're more open to look at things and question things. But yeah, and I do find that, I think as well, the vibration, as you mentioned, the vibration of the fruit and the photonic energy is highest in fruit. So there was a guy called Dr. Pop, and he measured the biophoton level of foods, and fruit is the highest because it's getting all this sunlight energy, and the flowers of the fruit, the little sort of stamens, are like antennae. And so those antennae suck in all this biophotonic energy. So yeah, I do think fruit vibrates at a very high level, especially organic, fresh picked fruit. And it's almost like an experience when you pick a piece of fruit ripe from the tree or ripe from the bush and eat it, and you're in the sunshine, and it's more like an experience than just a food. It really nourishes you on many, many levels. And I think that's when the vibrations of the fruit are the highest, when it's perfectly ripe and you just pick it and you eat it. And it's the nutrition content is usually at its highest then as well. And something I've noticed is music. Music has much more of an effect on me since I became a raw vegan. It's almost like I feel the music. I just want to dance, and I just feel the music going through me, the vibration of the music. And that's something I really noticed, that I liked music before, but I never felt music in the same way that I do since being on a raw vegan diet. It's just like music gets you in a way that it never got me before.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I've heard somebody say that before. Huh. I might have to pay attention to that. I don't know. I was going to say as well, in terms of evolution, because a lot of people will say that, we evolved to eat meat and all this and that, and our brains got bigger because of meat. And I'm thinking that since our physiology still shows that we're more geared towards fruit because of everything about our body and how easily we absorb it and eliminate it. It doesn't hang out in your intestines for a week or something or more. Things move very fast and efficiently. Anyways, I feel like almost like we're looking at, or people are talking about, two different levels of evolution in our history. You have one side that's kind of talking about how we had to eat meat and whatnot, which obviously a lot of us had to when we migrated to certain areas on the planet. But I feel like that's more so the last like 10, 15,000 years. I'm not an expert, maybe 20, I don't know. But compared to the potential amount of time we've been on Earth, where we were in the tropics more so, I think that is still potentially a very small amount of time compared to our total time of evolution. And there's somebody I want to have on the podcast if I could ever get him, but his name is Tony Wright. And he has some very, he has some very interesting research and theories about this idea. And, you know, humans, well, we could have been in the tropics eating fruit for 200,000 years, or maybe even much longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
And just being out of it for 10 or 15 or 20,000 years or 25 may not be enough time to severely alter our bodies to be, you know, actual omnivores or actual carnivores or whatever. So I'm just kind of wondering if you've ever contemplated our historical timeline as a species in regards to our diet.
Yeah, I know Tony Wright, and he would be a great person to have on. He's got such a knowledge of stuff and a very interesting take on a lot of things. Yeah, I believe that we evolved, or we were designed as fruit eaters. And I believe that the fruit was our natural food with maybe some, you know, little bits of other vegetable matter. And I believe that for whatever reason, we moved out of the areas where we lived, which would have been a very kind of, I don't know, I would say easy, but easy in a way, because if we were living in a kind of paradise among a lot of fruit trees, and we'd have our fruit to pick and eat, we wouldn't have to work 9 to 5 jobs. We wouldn't have to put up with cold temperatures. We wouldn't have to bother about possessions or clothes. We would just be living in this very ambient environment where our fruit was, you know, roundabout. And yes, we might have to travel between locations to find the fruit. But I think in the very beginning, the fruit was abundant, and we were frugivores living in that tropical environment. And then I think we moved away, and I think humans' brains did develop because they were on a fruit diet. And it's kind of interesting because there was a study done, I believe it was in South America, and it looked at spider monkeys and howler monkeys. Now, spider monkeys will eat predominantly fruit if they can access it. Howler monkeys will eat predominantly leaves. Both monkeys are approximately the same size and the same mass. But when they did autopsies on dead monkeys they'd found in the forest, they found that the brain of the spider monkey was twice as big as the howler monkey. So the howler monkey lives on leaves, the spider monkey lives on fruit. And the reason, when you think about it, now, if you're living on leaves and you're living in a tropical region, you don't really have to think about where your food's coming from or how to find it, because leaves are everywhere and they're there all year round. But if you're eating fruit, you've got to remember a few things. You've got to remember when the fruit's in season, because each fruit has its different season. So you've got to have a kind of calendar going on in your mind. And you've also got to remember where the fruit trees are. So you've got to have that geographical knowledge and that calendar knowledge. And monkeys don't have a pen and paper. They don't have an iPad. They can't write things down. They can't tap things in and say, yes, the mangoes are in season in September in this area. So they have to remember it. So actually a fruit eater does need a bigger brain, because they have to remember the geographical aspects of their food and also the seasonal aspects of their food. So I think, personally, I think our brain is bigger because we had to work all those things out. And I think we, for whatever reason, whether there was, a shift on the axis, whether there was an ice age, what happened, that we had to move out of those areas, and then we had to start living on other foods. And I think humans are adaptive. We would have died out if we weren't adaptive. If we could only live on tropical fruits, there'd probably be maybe a couple of humans still alive in some jungle in Borneo somewhere, but we wouldn't be at the population we are now. And so humans have got something in their genetics, in their design, that we can be adaptive in terms of food, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the optimal food for us. And I think what we eat changes our DNA. So although we've still got the basic anatomy and physiology of a fruit eater, we've got the dental formula, we've got the digestive tract, we've got the pH in our saliva and in our urine of a fruit eater. Although we've got that, we've moved out of that area and we've eaten other things, and our ancestors have eaten other things, and that affects our DNA. So what we eat affects our RNA, it affects our DNA. So what we eat doesn't just affect us now, it'll affect our children and our grandchildren. So we're passing our genetics down through food, even though our basic anatomy is the same. And that's why some people can not assimilate B12 and other people can. And some people seem to, thrive on a fruit diet, whereas other people need to sort of adjust into it. And I would never say everybody has to eat a fruit diet or a fruit diet is best for everybody. I think everybody has to find what works for them best personally. And we all have got tweaks to our DNA through what our ancestors have done. So I think it's very important that this journey for me is a personal journey. I can share my personal journey, but I would never presume to say everybody has to eat this way or this diet is best for everyone. I would hope to respect what works for different people. And if that's different from my diet, that's fine. Who am I to say what works best for anyone else apart from myself? So, yeah, I think we've adapted to a certain extent, and our DNA and our RNA has changed, but not our basic physiology and anatomy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well put. And that kind of leads me into what I was planning on mentioning, that at the end of the day, for most people, listening to a podcast or reading certain things is not going to convince them to all of a sudden make a drastic change or something. It's always going to be experience something. People need to experience things to truly believe it, just like I did. So because my experience went so well, quitting those other foods and trying to bring in as much fruit as possible for the last 10 years, I noticed the biggest thing I noticed was recovery from exercise. I've always played a lot of basketball, been in the weight room, hiking mountains, like these guys behind me here. And, it requires a lot from your body. And I started noticing that I wasn't getting sore anymore after working out, like in the gym. I was doing the same workouts, same kind of weight and whatever. And 2 days later, not sore, 3 days later, not sore. And the more fruit I eat, the more I notice that, like the faster the recovery, the less soreness. Like you said, going back to what you mentioned about hardly getting bruises or wounds healing really quickly and stuff. Same kind of idea. Just the rejuvenation and the regeneration was incredible. It was a night and day difference for me compared to before. And I just kept doing it. So people at the end of the day have to try something to believe it. And that's up to them. The information can only take them so far, and they can do as they wish with it. But I will say, the differences I've noticed have been pretty profound. Another thing I was going to ask you about, and I'm sure some people have very strong opinions about it, is that correct me if I'm wrong, you had a kid and you've raised him pretty much fruitarian mostly since birth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had 2 children. My first pregnancy, I was transitioning into a fruit diet because I found out about the fruit diet in my early stages of pregnancy. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do anything too drastic because it might affect the baby. So I started eating more fruit over about a year transition period. So both my children were brought up on fruit diets. And my second pregnancy was entirely raw, vegan, fruit-based pregnancy. Yeah. Yeah.
And people are going to ask, how's the kid doing? I've seen, I think, a couple of videos, and he's looking pretty smart and healthy and good skin and all of that.
Yeah, both of them were very healthy. They weren't vaccinated, and yet neither of them had any of the usual childhood illnesses. I remember with my older son, I wanted him to get chicken pox because it's supposed to be better if you get it when you're younger. So his cousins had chicken pox. The kids at school had chicken pox. We went on holiday and all the kids on the campsite had chicken pox. Go and play with them. Go and get it before you get too old. And he never had any symptoms of chicken pox. And then it was interesting because later when his blood was tested, he was found to have antibodies to chicken pox. So for me, that's the best kind of immunity. so that you're exposed to something, you build up the natural immunity to chickenpox, as he has, and he still got it because it carries on throughout your life, but you don't have any symptoms. And for me, that is the absolute pinnacle of immunity, to be exposed to a virus or whatever and get natural immunity to it without actually getting any symptoms. So they were both really healthy and happy. And I think because they were healthy and happy, I didn't really get people questioning me on their diets. But I do think breast milk is very important. So children aren't fruitarian, they're milkarians when they're born. And I long-term breastfed both of my children, my elder boy till he was 3.5, and my younger son till he was 4. And I think that was vital in their development, because I really think that children need milk for those first 3.5 to 4 years. It's a very important food for them. And at first, it is the only food for them. So I think if you're considering bringing up a child on a fruit-based diet, I think you need to think, are you prepared to long-term breastfeed? Because if you're not going to give your child animal milks, other animal milks, and you're not going to give your child, soy or plant milks because you want them to be a raw vegan, you have to, I really think it's so important. And the cases that I've heard of children that have failed to thrive or not been well on raw vegan or fruitarian diets, in every case, the child was not long-term breastfed, or there was insufficient milk from the mother. I think that is so, so important. And what is interesting, even people that are vegan will say, well, you can bring up a child vegan, but you can't bring up a child on a raw vegan or fruit-based diet. So when I was in the UK and my older son, when he was about 6, I wanted to get his B12 tested. And they said, we're not going to test his B12. What we're going to do is analyze his diet for 2 weeks. And they also did a follow-up again. And I thought, they're going to come back and say his diet's deficient in this and his RDAs aren't being met. But when the report came back, and I still have the report, and this was a government nutritionist, it wasn't an alternative vegan nutritionist, it was a bog standard state government nutritionist. They analysed everything he ate, everything he drank for 2 weeks, and they basically said all his RDAs are being met because he was having a B12 supplement, apart from calcium, which is 70% of what it should be. Now, he never had a filling, he had good bones, so I don't think he was deficient in calcium, but everything else met the RDAs. And I was quite surprised. I was expecting them to say he'll be deficient in this and he's got to have this, but they actually said, well, it's good what he's eating, apart from the calcium was on the low side. And even though he had really good teeth, and he's 31 now, 32 now, and he's only just recently had his first filling. So he had good teeth and bones. So I don't think he was calcium deficient. And often if you're eating more animal products, you do need more calcium, because the calcium acts as a buffer, because those products are acid forming. And the same with grains. Most grains are acid forming. And if you're eating a lot of acid forming foods, your blood needs to be at a set pH. So you will draw calcium out of your bones, out of your teeth, to ensure that your blood is a certain pH. So, and I mostly had really positive interactions with my children being brought up on the diet. And I think it was because I'd done the research. I felt confident that what I was feeding them was a good diet, and they were happy and they were healthy. And there's very little for people to kick back on when they see your children, that they don't get sick. They don't have any of the childhood illnesses. They've got lots of energy without being hyperactive. You can take them anywhere and they're very well behaved. And I did a talk once on fruitarianism, and I took my younger son, and there was another speaker. So the whole event was 4 hours. And I took my younger son, who was about 4 or 5 at the time, and he just had to sit on a chair basically the whole time. And at the end of the talk, the man came to me and he said, I was impressed with your talk about fruitarianism, but I was more impressed by your son, because he was like 4 and he just sat there. And, he was probably bored, but he was well behaved. He wasn't hyperactive. He could sit still for hours while these adults were droning on about diet and lifestyle. So, I think people saw that my children were on this diet, but they were healthy and happy. Their behavior was good. They were, well-behaved kids. So I didn't get much pushback. I think if you're bringing up children on the diet and you're not sure about it, you're having doubts, you've not done your research, or you've got valid doubts about it, people pick up on that energy and they will question you. But if you feel confident in what you're doing, and that confidence is based on the results you're having, the research you've done, then I think people pick up on that as well. And I never really got any criticism, well, not to my face anyway, about what diet my children were on. So yeah, I think it's important if you're bringing up children on the diet, long-term breastfeeding, all the other things as well, like the continuum concept is very important. If you're not giving your child love and care, it doesn't matter what diet they're being fed, it doesn't matter how good the quality of your breast milk, they're not going to be healthy and happy children. So there's that continuum concept, or attachment parenting, where you're always with your children, they don't feel abandoned, they don't feel lost, and they have this self-confidence. So when they get to about 4 or 5 years of age, they're suddenly really self-confident kids, because you've done that very close bonding in the first few years. So yeah, there's a lot of other things that are important for successful child rearing. Again, I think diet is the backbone. Because to do continuum concept or to do attachment parenting, if your children are always sick, if they're always hyperactive, if they've got a lot of fractious energy, it would be much more challenging. But to do attachment parenting when you've got a calm child, a happy child, a healthy child, makes it so much more easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, do you take any supplements besides B12 or vitamin D?
No,
you get enough sun in Australia.
You get enough sun. I did the experiment with vitamin B12 about a month ago, and it was 2 months, and I've stopped supplementing because I didn't notice the difference. But what I have started doing recently is taking a little bit of powdered seaweed. I found out that the soils in this area, and I eat mostly local produce, are quite deficient in iodine. So Australia is an old country, our soils are old, and in addition, we're inland. And so both of those things can add up to mean the soil is a bit deficient in iodine. So what I have done, I haven't had any symptoms of iodine deficiency, but I've thought, because I've been living here a couple of years now, and because I'm eating mostly local produce and aiming towards self-sufficiency, so I'm putting seaweed on my fruit trees that I'm growing, I'm putting it on the leaves and in the soil to build up the iodine around the fruit trees, but also I'm just taking like a little pinch of seaweed powder, maybe every other day. And that is something that I haven't done before. And I'm doing that because I've been told by 2 different people, the soils here are deficient in iodine. And so I'm thinking, just to be on the safe side, I don't particularly want to take inorganic iodine because I think it's toxic personally, but to take seaweed and get it in an organic form from seaweed is what I'm doing. So that is kind of like a supplement, I feel, in addition to the fruit. Yeah.
I've heard the iodine is like almost everybody doesn't get the ideal amount of iodine. No matter what diet, I think. I thought I heard that.
Yeah. And I think, it's like years ago when people didn't move much and people ate local food. In the UK, people get goitres, the swelling of the thyroid, if they're insufficient in iodine. So there was an area that was the most inland area, and the soils were the most deficient in iodine in the UK. Derbyshire, it's a county in the UK. And they used to call the goitres Derbyshire neck, because so many people in Derbyshire got it. I mean, that's a severe iodine deficiency, but there might be a lot of people that are slightly deficient in iodine. So I've never had any deficiency symptoms. I've always felt well and good, and I hadn't had any noticeable issues with my thyroid gland. But I'm just aware that these soils may be deficient in iodine. And if I'm eating produce primarily from this area, to me, it makes sense to long-term look at building up the fruit trees that I'm growing. So building up the soil around them with iodine so that they have more iodine in, and the fruits on them contain more iodine. But short-term, just taking a pinch of it's just dried seaweed. That's all it is. And I don't have much because I don't do well with sodium, and seaweed can be quite high in sodium. So, yeah.
Yeah, I notice as well when I'm eating more of a higher raw foods diet, which should be all the time. But the salt I get really sensitive to the salt. It doesn't take that long. I
Yeah.
remember one time I think I had a little bit of sushi with some soy sauce, and I was like, ugh, like I didn't put hardly any soy sauce on this, and it
Yeah.
feels like it's just an overload. It's gross. I was like, well,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. That
Yeah,
is
I never
interesting.
noticed it before. Because I was on a macrobiotic vegan diet, and that's quite high in sodium because you've got miso soup and you've got tamari, and you're having beans cooked with a bit of salt and seaweed and things. But since I've been on a raw diet, I've occasionally had raw olives that have got salt on them, or sun-dried tomatoes that I didn't know had salt on, and I get like puffy water retention the next day and feel sluggish and get
Wow.
puffy eyes. And
That's quite a
so, yeah.
reaction.
And what's interesting is that the seaweed, I haven't had that reaction. Maybe because I'm just taking a pinch of seaweed because it's quite, it's powdered, so it's quite strong, and it's been dehydrated, I guess. But because I haven't had those symptoms, I'm thinking, well, I will carry on taking the seaweed. If I'd got puffy eyes and puffy ankles, then that might be too much sodium for me, but it seems to be working so far, so I'm just going to carry on with that.
I gotta ask you, going back to something you said earlier there, if you want to answer, you mentioned how you didn't get your kids to try to protect myself from the YouTube algorithm poked.
Yes.
They didn't get too poked when they were younger. Did they get any of the usual jabs that babies get? Because I know, like, I was born in the 80s here in Canada, and I think we get like 3 or 4 of them at the beginning, and then like when you're 3, and then like a couple of them, and then when you're 7, and now it's much worse. They get way more in Canada or the US, etc. Did your kids have anything?
No, nothing. They had no injections at all.
Wow.
And then when we migrated to Australia, when my older son, he'd be 12 or 13 at the time, we had to have all these tests to get accepted, to make sure we were healthy. And one of them was a blood test, and he had blood taken, and he'd never had any kind of needle, and he about fainted because it was like, I suppose other kids, they don't like getting needles, but they've had them before. So he didn't have anything. And then he was really shocked. Like, I'm really going to have this needle in my arm. But yeah, they didn't have anything. I made that decision as a parent because I read a really good book by Vera Scriber just before I was pregnant. I think I was fortunate to go to a talk by Vera Scriber, who I believe might live in Australia now, but at the time I lived in the UK, and she was doing a tour. And I was just like, wow, I didn't know any of this. And I was lucky to find out the information before I had my eldest son. And I do think vaccination is a very personal decision. I think it's up to each parent or carer to make that decision for their child, and to read both sides and make an informed decision. And so I read both sides, and I made an informed decision because of what I read on both sides regarding them being. And I decided, no, I don't think it's the best thing. I think natural immunity is the best thing for my children. And that's proved to be the case because they didn't get neither of them got any of the usual childhood illnesses. They didn't get mumps, measles, chicken pox, anything like that at all. So I think they're just their immune system. They got what they need. They played in the dirt, especially my younger son. He was always in the dirt playing. And they say that kids that play in the dirt, kids that grow up on farms, have a better immune system because we live in a world where germs are considered bad, even the helpful germs. I mean, without bacteria, without the helpful microbiome, microorganisms in our digestive system, we wouldn't be alive. We need the good bacteria. Sometimes the bad bacteria can be a bit tricky and get us into trouble, but we need the good bacteria. And we're so anti-germ, Glen 20, antibacterial mouthwashes, antibacterial surface things. And so all these good bacteria are killed, but also our children need to be exposed to these things to get a good immune system. So they found that kids that play in the dirt, kids that live on farms, have much less incidences of asthma and eczema and other issues because their immune system has had a chance to develop properly. They've not been shielded from everything. I remember when I was looking at advice for bringing up a baby when I had my first son. And one of the things in this book said, when you wash your baby's face, boil the water first. And I was thinking, what? That's just wiping the baby's face. And I just thought, this is crazy. Yes, maybe if you were giving your child water to drink, but just wiping their face. And this is another thing, that babies that are born, by vaginal births have a much better gut microbiome than cesarean births. And I know I was a cesarean baby. Sometimes you can't help it, and the cesarean is the best option in the circumstance. But what happens when the baby's been in this sterile environment in the womb, and suddenly the waters break, and as the baby passes through the birth canal, it suddenly gets its first exposure to bacteria and microorganisms. And the healthier the mother, the better the microbiome will be in the birth canal. And so this is the baby's exposure, and this will help the baby's own skin microbiome, but also its gut microbiome. And this is another reason why we shouldn't wash the baby's face with chemicals. We shouldn't wash the baby with chemicals when the baby's born, because we'll wash off, and that will keep, to some extent, with that child for its whole life, that experience in the birth canal and those microorganisms the baby has been exposed to being born. So, children need bacteria, not the bad bacteria, but they need good bacteria to be healthy, as we all do. Yeah,
I think so. Where's the best fruit you've ever come across? What country?
France.
Really? France?
Because of a specific piece of fruit. My favorite piece of fruit is the Charente melon, which comes from France. But I must say France is up there because the French like to shop in little shops. I don't know if it's still the case, but the last time I was there, they would have lots of different shops, and people would go and get fresh produce every day. And the Charente melon, which grows in Provence, is the best melon I've ever had. It's hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's wonderful. And you'd buy it, and it would come in its own little paper bag with the name of the grower on it, or its own little box, because the growers are so proud of their fruit, and the French really seem to respect their fruit and vegetables. So I do think France is a wonderful area for produce in the Provence area. I do think the quality and the care and the love that the French people show for their fruit is unusual. Apart from France, Bali, I've had very, very good fruit in Bali. In Brunei, I went to Brunei, and oh my goodness, the fruit there. I tried red durian, which was out of this world. I always wanted to try it. I've seen a picture of it in the National Geographic, and I thought, that's mad. That's mad. That fruit is so red. How can it be so red? And then when I was in Brunei, I actually got to try some. France, Bali, Brunei, Australia has some great fruit as well. So I think probably they're the places where I have got the best fruit, local fruit. In the UK, I've got some amazing fruit from all over the world via a buying group. So I did eat very well in the UK. But actually, in terms of local fruit, I would say France, Bali, Brunei, and Australia. Probably.
Nice. Yeah, I need to get to Bali one day for sure. For me, it's been kind of a toss-up between Vietnam and Ecuador. When I was in Ecuador in the Galapagos Islands, they had some papaya there I had never seen before. It was like the size of a bowling ball, and it didn't look like the longer Mexican papaya, nor was it like the Hawaiian smaller papaya. It was just some like big ball, and the smell was incredible. Before I ever put it in my mouth, the smell was amazing. I was like, wow, that's a nice smell. I wonder how this tastes. And I ate it, and it was like, how I describe eating good fruit and why I try to gravitate towards it is that, like, you know how, like, maybe before you were a fruitarian, like when you would eat something like salty, savory, whatever, macaroni and cheese or whatever people can think of, and you're like, wow, that's really good. That tastes amazing. You know, it's like crack or whatever. With fruit, I feel like it's amazing in a different way. It's like I'm eating God food or something, and I'm never left feeling like I want more when, you know, I got enough. Whereas with other foods, sometimes I'm like, oh, you know, I just like some more of that, even though I don't need it at all and I'm not hungry anymore. With fruit, it's just amazing. Like you get really good quality fruit and you're satiated. You don't
Yes.
want to over binge. I'm sure some people do sometimes, but
Mm.
I find it's more likely to have that effect on you, which is interesting. Last thing I was going to ask you, kind of related, you're talking about birth and stuff earlier. I heard something that was interesting. I never heard before. Some people are claiming that the placenta gets cut off too early from the child, and that the placenta apparently may have like incredible benefits that can be really long lasting in the development of the kid, and can have lasting effects later in life. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I think there's something called lotus birth, where they leave the placenta attached until it naturally falls off. For myself, I didn't get it cut straight away. I left the placenta, but I didn't leave it on until it naturally fell off. But I left it on a while until there was no pulsing or anything. And with my first birth, I was in hospital. I wanted a home birth, but they were like, "Oh, you're taking too long. You're taking too long." Got me into hospital, even though there was nothing wrong. The birth was perfectly fine. But I never even saw the placenta. And I think I really want to see the placenta. It's been inside me for 9 months. I wanted to see what it looked like. So with my second birth, which was the home birth, I was like, I want to leave the placenta on for a while. And then I want to, have a look at it. And because I was like, after you've given birth, I wasn't really in the right frame of mind to examine the placenta. It was put in the freezer, the placenta. And then when I was like, while I was pregnant, I bought this little mango tree. And so then I planted the placenta under the mango tree. And that mango tree has traveled with me wherever I've moved. So it last moved 1,000 miles from the Sunshine Coast in Australia to far north Queensland. And it's now planted here. So that is a very special tree. And it had a lot of mangoes on it very, very quickly. It was about 2 years old and it had 31 mangoes on it. So maybe the placenta did have a magical effect, because I was like, it's such a small tree. How can you have 31 mangoes on? And it did grow very well. Took a pasting with being moved on the back of a truck 1,000 miles. And so I've had to nurture it. Lots of seaweed, talking to it, watering, and it's flourishing at the moment. So I hope it continues to flourish. But yes, I have heard of this lotus birth where they leave the placenta on until it naturally falls off. Many animals eat the placenta. I didn't fancy eating the placenta. I wouldn't have anything ethical about eating the placenta, because it's from me. It's not like it's an animal product, but it's my animal product. So I would have eaten it if I'd fancied it, but it was like, no, bring me a mango, but I don't really want to eat the placenta, but I did plant it. So I think, yes, I think the fact is, when a baby's born, it's still getting oxygen through the placenta for sure. And people cut it and the placenta's still pulsing. And so I think as an oxygen supply for that newborn baby's brain, it makes sense to let the baby breathe, but also get what it can from the placenta, especially while the placenta's still pulsating. But yeah, this lotus birth, I think that's what it's called, that I've heard of, sounds very interesting, where the placenta is left until it naturally comes away. I think that's probably, the ultimate in terms of getting what the baby needs out of the placenta.
Well, if that's not an interesting tidbit to include in a podcast that people probably have never heard before, then I don't know what it is. Try planting your placentas under your fruit trees and go from there. Anyways, I guess it's been probably a little over an hour and a half now. So I know you've got some things to do. So I just want to thank you for coming on here today on the Mystical Mountain. And if you have any websites or anything like that you'd like to mention, I know you wrote a book too. I actually meant to ask you about that. Then maybe you want to mention whatever you would like right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. It's been lovely. Yeah, I have a website which is fruitgod.com, where I have some information. I also have a book that I wrote. It's not in print at the moment because I used to have a green printer. So it was very important to me that any book that I sold was printed on, sustainable or recycled paper, with green inks, and also the electricity used was, from a good source. unfortunately, the printers aren't in operation anymore, so I haven't got a reprint. If I can find a local printer that is a green printer, I will get my book republished in hard copy, but I do have a PDF copy and I send that out free. So anybody wanting a PDF copy can email me. My email address is fruitbatann@yahoo.com, and that's Anne with an E. So fruitbatann with an E @yahoo.com. So, and I'll send you a free PDF copy. Also, my contact details are on my website, and I've got an Instagram account, Fruity's Butte, and I also have got a Facebook page. If you Google Anne Osborne, Fruit Bat Anne, you should find me. And I do put a lot of information on my Facebook page. I've got a lot of old newspaper clippings on there about the fruit diet from old times when it was being, lauded as how important it was. So that's the way to find me and find out more information.
Okay, awesome. That's amazing. Man, there's so many things, so many ways you can go with this, but we might have to have you on again one day, perhaps, and go over a couple other details on all of this stuff. But thank you very much for coming on here today. It's been awesome. I remember hearing about you actually just in the Facebook groups and the YouTube clips over the years when I got interested in the raw foods world, and I thought, wow, this person's been fruitarian 30 years. My goodness. So it was cool to finally speak to you for sure. And for anybody out there listening, leave a like, leave a comment, good or bad, whatever, as long as you're reasonably polite on YouTube. And don't forget to follow The Mystical Mountain on YouTube. I'm on Rumble, trying to get on BitChute. BitChute sucks at uploading things, but all the main podcasting platforms should be on there. Spotify, Google, iTunes, iHeartRadio, etc., etc. If it's not on there, let me know. I'll try to get it on there. If anybody's got any questions about any past podcasts, or if maybe you want to come on, feel free to leave a comment in the YouTube videos or send me an email. The email should be in the description below. So anyways, thanks everybody for listening, and thank you, Anne, once again for being here. I appreciate it. And until next time, everybody try to eat some more fruit. Get some watermelon, some papayas in there, not just the oranges and apples. Okay, thank you.